soft hum of applause filled the grand hall as Michael Grant took to the stage. His black, polished shoes were reflecting the bright spotlight shining upon him, and his signature confident smile was pasted on his face. This was the annual Hollywood Stars Gala, and Michael was being honored as the Performer of the Year. "To dreams realized and fears conquered," Michael said, raising the crystal-clear trophy in his hand. The crowd roared in approval, yet his voice faltered slightly, almost imperceptibly, at the word fears. Beneath the charm and glamour, Michael harbored a secret, one that had shadowed him since he was 10 years old. Michael's childhood in Savannah, Georgia, was idyllic, or so he thought. His father, Captain George Grant, was a brave sailor who often crossed the Atlantic. Stories about Captain Grant's bravery filled Michael with awe, but one evening changed everything. It was summer 1998. A storm had swept across the Atlantic, and the news flashed grim updates about the cargo ship Perseverance, captained by George Grant. The ship had encountered rough waters near an uncharted region, believed to be remnants of the mythical Atlantis. Days turned into weeks, but there was no sign of the ship or its crew. The grief-stricken young Michael clung to the hope that his father might still be alive. But with time, hope gave way to fear, a paralyzing, deep-seated terror of water. From that day forward, Michael shunned the ocean, pools, and even the rain. His mother, Julia, did her best to make things as normal as possible, but the shadow of that loss weighed heavily over them. As Michael grew older, he buried his fear deep beneath layers of ambition and stardom, convincing the world, and himself, that he was fearless. Present-day Los Angeles was Michael's peak in terms of career. His latest movie, Rising Ashes, had shattered box office records, and his fan base covered continents. However, challenges are always lurking in the shadow of fame, and the next challenge was waiting for him in the form of a script lying on his mahogany desk. His manager, Claire Dawson, was over the moon. "Michael, this could be the role of a lifetime. The Depths isn't just a film, it's an experience," she said, her eyes gleaming. The film was a gripping survival story of a man lost at sea, fighting against nature and himself. Michael froze. The very concept of the movie was enough to make him shiver. "Claire, I don't know. Water scenes aren't exactly my thing," he mumbled, avoiding her eyes. Claire raised an eyebrow. "You've leaped off buildings, wrestled lions, and dangled from helicopters. And now you're telling me water scenes aren't your thing?" "It's not that easy," Michael said softly. But Claire, persistent as always, pushed forward. "The director, James Calloway, specifically asked for you. He believes no one else can embody the intensity this role demands. And there's a sequence shot near the rumored ruins of Atlantis. Think of the headlines. Michael Grant faces the abyss in Atlantis. It's poetic." Michael's chest tightened at the mention of Atlantis. It was the same word tied to his father's disappearance, the same legend that had haunted him for years. He wanted to refuse, but something inside him stirred, a longing to confront the shadow that had loomed over his life for decades. "I'll think about it," he finally said, his voice betraying his inner turmoil. That night, Michael was staring at the ocean from his Malibu beach house. The moonlight danced on the waves, but instead of serenity, he felt unease. Memories of his father's disappearance and his own helplessness as a child came rushing back. He had a dream, where the sea became an inky black well. He found himself drowning. He could not breathe, as the dark shadow of some old city was under him. He woke up, panting for breath, his heart beating like a jackrabbit. "I just can't do this," he whispered to himself. But somewhere inside him, he knew that he could not keep running away from his fears forever. A week had passed, and Michael was still vacillating, when one afternoon, an unlooked-for visitor arrived at the door. It was Lucas Carter, an old friend of his father, retired from the Navy with a decoration as a diver. He had read all about the film and knew how much Michael wanted out. "This isn't living, son," Lucas said abruptly as they sat in front of the fireplace. Michael's jaw clenched. "You have no idea what it's like, Lucas. The water. It's as if it comes alive. It waits to pull me under." Lucas nodded thoughtfully. "Fear is a powerful thing, Michael. But do you know what's more powerful? Facing it head on. I can help you if you're willing." Michael hesitated. To train under Lucas, to confront the ocean, was terrifying him. But those words of Lucas struck a chord. For the first time in his life, Michael felt he might just be able to overcome this fear. He started with baby steps. He took Michael to a private pool and asked him to just sit by the edge. At first, even that was too much. But gradually, Michael started dipping his feet in, then wading into the shallow end. "Remember, the water isn't your enemy," Lucas said. "It's a part of you. You just need to learn how to move with it, not against it." The sessions were both physically and emotionally exhausting. Michael was still having nightmares, but he was beginning to feel small differences. The panic attacks did not come as frequently, and the water no longer felt so claustrophobic. One evening, as Michael stood ankle-deep in the ocean, he looked out at the horizon. The waves no longer seemed menacing. Instead, they felt inviting. It was as if the ocean was calling him, not to drown him, but to help him discover a part of himself he had long buried. Michael called Claire the next morning. "Tell James I'm in," he said, his voice steady. The roar of the ocean was deafening, the waves crashing against the jagged rocks like thunderclaps. Michael Grant stood at the edge of a vast, open sea, his wetsuit clinging to his skin as he adjusted the oxygen tank strapped to his back. The crew of the depths buzzed around him, preparing for the film's most critical scene. The weight of the moment pressed on him like a storm cloud, but he stood firm. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running. It had not been easy. Accepting the role, Michael's life became a whirlwind of preparation. Lucas Carter, his father's old friend, had not only become his trainer, but his confidant. Over weeks of grueling underwater training, Michael had faced his fear head-on, each dive into the pool or open water chipping away at the chains of his phobia. This was no controlled pool environment. The scene required Michael to dive deep into an underwater cave near the ruins of the mythical Atlantis, a place steeped in mystery and danger. James Calloway, the director, had insisted on shooting on location if he was to capture the raw emotion of the setting. As the crew finalized the preparations, Lucas approached Michael, his grizzled face calm but serious. "You ready for this, kid?" he asked, placing a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I don't think I'll ever feel completely ready," he admitted, "but I'm not backing out." Lucas smiled, a hint of pride in his eyes. "That's all that matters." As the cameras rolled, Michael slipped into the water, the cold seeping through his wetsuit and sending a shiver down his spine. The ocean felt vast, endless, and alive. He fought the rising panic as Lucas's voice echoed in his mind. Move with it, not against it. The dive started. With each kick of his fins, Michael descended deeper and the sunlight was slowly fading with the darkness of the water. His breathing was ringing in his ears, steady reminders of his lifeline. Ahead of him loomed the underwater cave with its jagged entrance like a beast's mouth. The set crew had put up lights for illumination, creating eerie shadows that danced on the ancient rock formations. Just as Michael swam deeper into the cave, memories of his father filled his mind, and he was almost hearing the voice of Captain Grant telling tales of Atlantis and the mysteries deep. The burden of his father's legacy crushed him, yet instead of feeling fear, something strange connected them, as if the ocean guided him. Halfway through the scene, disaster struck. A sudden current surged through the cave, stronger than anyone had anticipated. Michael was swept off course, his body slamming against the rocky walls. His oxygen gauge blinked red, signaling danger. Panic clawed at him as he struggled to regain control. Through the chaos, a glint of light caught his eye. Turning his head, he saw what looked like an ancient artifact embedded in the cave wall. It was a rusted gold emblem etched with a symbol he recognized from his father's journal, a symbol tied to the legend of Atlantis. Michael's heart was racing. Was it merely coincidence, or perhaps something that came from his father's final trip? The water pulled at him once again and tried to carry him deeper, but he could not let go of the badge. Gathering what strength he could, he clenched the emblem and began moving back towards the light. Michael broke through the surface of the water, gasping for air, the emblem clutched tightly in his hand. The crew rushed to pull him onto the boat, their faces etched with concern. "Cut! Are you okay?" James Calloway shouted, his voice tinged with both relief and frustration. Michael nodded, still catching his breath. "I'm fine, but I found something," he said, holding up the emblem. He was taken aback, pale, as he stared at it. This was on your father's ship," he whispered, his voice shaking under emotion. The news was a shock to the whole crew. Michael found something far more precious than a prop. That piece of the past is actually an important part of the puzzle. Michael continued exploring the emblem origins for the following days. Through his collaboration with Lucas, he found some record evidence that actually suggested Captain Grant's ship was near the lost city of Atlantis before it vanished into the unknown. The emblem is part of an old relic the crew discovered from the ocean floor, an artifact believed to be cursed. As Michael started putting together the story, it all made sense to him. His father hadn't disappeared accidentally. It was a part of the story that connected with humanity's eternal struggle against the unknown. Clarity was brought in, but closure wasn't. For years, Michael was afraid of the water because it somehow symbolized loss and uncertainty. Now he saw it as a mark of resilience and discovery. Now, it was the time to take that final shot on the film, the climactic scene where Michael's character was lost at sea and found an oasis in the depths. So, the team went back into the underwater cave, tension abounding. And Michael, brimming with renewed confidence, was not hesitant enough to take that plunge. He sank down into the now, channeling every bit of emotion he possibly could into a performance. Fears, hurts, and hope all spilled onto the floor and out to all the people to see, fresh and raw. The director let out a shouted "cut," and the team applauded. To Michael, that was not really the victory, this scene itself. The actual victory was within him, transforming him, looking into the depth of his hell, and then facing it, and making it back on top. Months later, Michael stood in front of a packed audience as The Depths premiered. The film was declared a masterpiece, and his performance hauntingly authentic. When the credits ended, he came on stage to address the audience. "There was once a time when I let fear rule my life," he started, his voice unwavering. "I was afraid of the unknown, afraid of loss, afraid of the depths that was unseen. But this journey taught me that fear was not something to be feared, but something to embrace. Because on the other side of fear lies freedom." The crowd roared to their feet, but Michael's eyes were fixed on one face in the crowd, Lucas, his mentor, who nodded with pride. Back at his Malibu beach house, Michael placed the emblem on his mantle next to a photo of his father. The ocean waves crashed outside, no longer a source of fear, but a reminder of how far he had come. For the first time in years, Michael walked to the water's edge, letting the waves wash over his feet. He smiled, not because the journey was over, but because it had just begun.